I'm 68 years old, and I'm about to tell you something most people won't like hearing. The biggest mistake of my life wasn't losing money. It wasn't missing a big opportunity. It wasn't starting too late or failing too often. My biggest mistake was playing it safe for far too long. And if you're watching this right now, there's a good chance you're making the same mistake, and you don't even realize it yet. Because society teaches you to fear the wrong things. It teaches you to fear instability, to fear uncertainty, to fear stepping off the path. But it never teaches you to fear what should actually terrify you: a life that looks successful on the outside and feels empty on the inside. You see, for most of my life, I did everything right. At least that's what I was told. I went to school, I got a respectable job, I showed up on time, I worked hard, I didn't take unnecessary risks, I was responsible, dependable, sensible, and everyone around me praised me for it. My parents were proud, my bosses trusted me, my friends called me smart. People said things like, "You're doing great and you've got it figured out." And for a long time, I believed them. I believed that if I just kept going, kept climbing, kept earning, kept being careful, everything would eventually feel worth it. But here's the part nobody warns you about. You can do everything right and still end up deeply dissatisfied with your life. I didn't realize this in my 20s, or my 30s, or even my 40s. Back then, I told myself the same things you probably tell yourself now. This is just temporary. I'll take risks later. I'll do what I really want once I'm more secure, once I save enough, once things settle down. There was always a reason to wait, and waiting felt responsible. What I didn't understand, what nobody explained to me, is that waiting slowly turns into a habit, and habits turn into decades. I spent years telling myself I was being smart, but what I was really doing was trading my time for comfort, my curiosity for certainty, my potential for predictability. And the scary part, it didn't feel like a mistake at the time. That's what makes it so dangerous. At 54, something happened that forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding my entire life. It wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't a financial collapse. It wasn't some dramatic moment out of a movie. It was much quieter than that. I was sitting in my car after work, parked outside my house, engine still running. And I remember thinking, is this it? Not in a dramatic way, not in a suicidal way, just a calm, heavy realization. This was my life. Wake up, go to work, come home tired, repeat. Week after week, year after year, I had the house, I had the savings, I had the stability everyone told me to chase. And yet, sitting there in that car, I felt a strange mix of dread and disappointment. Because deep down, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't alive either. I had built a life designed to avoid pain and accidentally eliminated excitement, growth, and meaning along the way. And here's the thought that hit me hardest that day. If nothing changes, this is exactly how the rest of my life will go. That realization scared me more than any financial risk ever could. But instead of acting on it, I did what I had always done. I ignored it. I told myself I was being ungrateful. I told myself other people had it worse. I told myself this was just adult life. And I kept going. That's another lie we don't talk about enough. Just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal, and it definitely doesn't mean it's healthy. I stayed in the same job for over 30 years, not because I loved it, not because it challenged me, but because it paid well enough, and it was safe. Every year, I thought about leaving. Every year, I found a reason not to. The market isn't great. I have responsibilities. It's risky at my age. What if it doesn't work out? Fear always sounded logical, and logic is very good at justifying regret in advance. Here's the truth I wish someone had told me when I was younger. Money didn't ruin my life. Fear did. Fear of starting over, fear of looking foolish, fear of losing what I had already built. So I kept choosing the familiar over the meaningful. And every year I stayed, it got harder to leave. Because the more comfortable your cage becomes, the harder it is to admit that you're trapped. By the time I was 60, the idea of making a major change felt impossible. Not because I couldn't do it, but because I had convinced myself it was too late. That phrase alone has destroyed more lives than poverty ever has. Too late. Too late to change careers, too late to take risks, too late to start something new, too late to become who you actually are. I believed that lie for far too long, and it cost me years I will never get back. The hardest part isn't the money I didn't make. It's the versions of myself I never allowed to exist, the ideas I never explored, the paths I never walked, the skills I never developed, the confidence I never built. All because I was afraid of being uncomfortable for a while. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The pain of playing it safe doesn't hit you right away. It creeps in slowly. It shows up as boredom, as restlessness, as a quiet sense of dissatisfaction you can't quite explain. And then one day, you wake up and realize decades have passed. That's when it hits hard. Not as panic, but as grief. Grief for a life that could have been bigger. Grief for risks you never took. Grief for a younger version of yourself who trusted you to be brave and was let down. And if you think this doesn't apply to you because you're young, because you still have time, that's exactly what I thought too. Time doesn't warn you before it disappears. It just quietly slips away while you're busy being responsible. There's something people don't tell you about playing it safe. It works. At first, you get paid. Your bills are covered. People stop worrying about you. And for a while, that feels like winning. But slowly, almost invisibly, the price starts to increase. Not in dollars, in days, in energy, in identity. I used to tell myself I was being patient, but patience eventually turns into postponement, and postponement quietly becomes permanent. In my 40s, I had a friend named Mark. Mark was the opposite of me in every way that mattered. He changed jobs often, tried different businesses, failed more times than I can count. I remember thinking he was reckless, unstable, irresponsible. I told myself I was smarter. While I stayed in the same role, Mark bounced around. While I collected steady paychecks, he dealt with uncertainty, and yet something about him always unsettled me. He was alive in a way I wasn't. Not happier all the time, not richer, but awake. He talked about what he was building, what he was learning, what he wanted to try next. I talked about deadlines, meetings, retirement plans. At the time, I thought I was ahead. Now I understand the truth. I was surviving. He was living. Mark didn't become wildly successful, but he became himself. That distinction matters more than you realize, especially later in life. I lost touch with him over the years. Different schedules, different priorities. Last year, I ran into him by accident at a grocery store. He looked older, of course. We both did. But something about him was light. We talked for a few minutes. He told me about the small consulting business he was running, about the freedom he had over his time. He asked me what I was doing, and for the first time I felt embarrassed by my answer. Not because my job was bad, but because it wasn't mine. It was something I had accepted, not chosen. That conversation stayed with me for weeks because it forced me to confront a painful question. What if stability isn't safety at all? What if it's just a slower way to lose yourself? I spent decades believing money would buy me freedom later, but later never arrived. Every raise came with more responsibility. Every promotion came with less time. Every increase in income tightened the trap. I wasn't free. I was expensive to maintain. That's another truth nobody talks about. The more successful you become in a life you don't love, the harder it is to leave. Your lifestyle adjusts, your commitments grow, your fear multiplies. You don't just risk losing income, you risk losing identity. People know you as the reliable one, the professional, the safe choice. Walking away feels like betraying the version of yourself everyone recognizes. So you stay. And staying feels easier than starting over. Until one day, it isn't. I watched colleagues retire over the years. Some of them had millions saved. And yet, I've never seen people look more lost. They had prepared financially, but they had never prepared emotionally. Their entire sense of worth had been tied to a role they no longer had. They didn't know who they were without it. That terrified me because I saw myself in them. I had spent my life optimizing for comfort, not meaning. And comfort, I learned too late, is a terrible life goal. It numbs you, it dulls your instincts, it lowers your tolerance for uncertainty. It convinces you that good enough is good enough until you realize you've been settling for decades. Here's the part that hurts the most. The biggest risks I regret weren't financial, they were personal. I wanted to start a small business in my 30s. I had ideas, energy, time, but I didn't want to risk my paycheck, so I waited. I wanted to move to a different city for a while, experience something new, meet different people, but it didn't seem practical, so I stayed. I wanted to write, not professionally, not for money, just to explore thoughts I never voiced. But I was tired, busy, and afraid of being bad at it, so I didn't. Each decision made sense on its own. That's how regret works. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It disguises itself as logic, as responsibility, as adulthood. And then one day, you realize you've built a life that looks complete, but feels unfinished. Let me tell you about the moment it finally broke me. It was my 65th birthday. No drama, no breakdown. Just a quiet moment late at night, sitting alone. I asked myself a question I had avoided my entire life. If I could go back, would I live this same life again? And the answer came instantly. No, not even close. That answer stayed with me because it meant something important. I hadn't just made a few wrong choices, I had followed the wrong philosophy. I believed safety was success. I believed money would eventually buy meaning. I believed fear was wisdom. None of that was true. The most painful realization wasn't that I had failed. It was that I had never truly tried. I had spent my life avoiding mistakes and accidentally avoided growth. And the clock, whether I liked it or not, was still moving. After that night, after I admitted to myself that I wouldn't choose this life again, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. For the first time, I stopped asking myself the question I had always asked: is this safe? And I started asking a different one: is this worth my time? That question changed everything, because safety is about avoiding loss. but time is already being lost, whether you act or not. I wish someone had told me this earlier. You're not choosing between risk and safety. You're choosing between different kinds of risk. The risk of trying and possibly failing, or the risk of never trying and definitely regretting it. One of those hurts temporarily, the other hurts forever. I spent years believing I was protecting my future. What I was really doing was borrowing against it. Every time I said later, I was quietly spending time I didn't actually have. Later is a comforting lie. It makes you feel responsible without forcing you to act. Later doesn't argue. Later doesn't demand courage. Later doesn't make you uncomfortable. Later just waits. And then one day, later becomes never. I see this lie everywhere now. I see people in their 30s saying, I'll take risks once I'm more established. People in their 40s saying, I'll do what I want after the kids are grown. People in their 50s saying, I'll focus on myself once I retire. And people in their 60s realizing they waited too long. Let me be very clear about something. I'm not saying you should quit your job tomorrow. I'm not saying you should burn everything down. That's another excuse people use to avoid the conversation. If I can't change everything, I won't change anything. That mindset keeps you stuck. Change rarely happens in one dramatic move. It happens in small, uncomfortable decisions. In saying no when you normally say yes. In choosing growth over approval. In risking embarrassment instead of living with regret. After 65, I finally started doing things that scared me. Not big things and small things, but they mattered. I started turning down work I didn't care about, even when it paid well. That alone felt terrifying. I had spent decades measuring my worth by my productivity. Letting go of that felt like losing a part of myself. But slowly, something unexpected happened. I started to feel lighter. I started to sleep better. I started to notice how much of my stress had come from trying to maintain a life I didn't even enjoy. I also started something I had wanted to do for years. I began writing, not for an audience, not for validation, just to hear my own thoughts clearly for the first time in my life. And you know what surprised me most? I wasn't bad at it. I wasn't great either. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally engaging with my life instead of just managing it. That's another thing nobody tells you. You don't need to be exceptional to feel fulfilled. You just need to be honest. Honest about what drains you. Honest about what excites you. Honest about what you're avoiding. For most of my life, I avoided listening to myself because listening would have forced me to act, and action felt risky. But inaction has consequences too. They're just delayed. Here's something I've learned watching people my age. Regret doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up in quiet moments, in long nights, in the things you don't talk about. It shows up when you see someone younger doing what you were once afraid to try. And instead of feeling inspired, you feel defensive. That's how you know you've been lying to yourself. I used to judge people who took risks. I called them unrealistic. Now I understand. I wasn't judging them. I was protecting my own fear. Fear loves to disguise itself as wisdom. It tells you stories that sound mature. Be realistic. Don't rock the boat. You should be grateful. Gratitude is important, but gratitude shouldn't be used as a weapon against your own growth. You can appreciate what you have and still want more from your life. Those two things are not opposites. They're signs of self-respect. The biggest shift for me came when I stopped trying to optimize my life for money. and started optimizing it for energy. What gives me energy? What drains it? What feels heavy? What feels alive? These questions matter more than any financial projection because money can be replaced, time can't, and neither can your attention. Attention is your real currency. Where you spend it determines the shape of your life. I spent most of mine giving my best attention to things that didn't love me back. And by the time I noticed, I had very little left for myself. If you're listening to this and thinking, this sounds familiar, I want you to pay attention to that feeling. Don't push it away. Discomfort is often the first sign of truth. You don't need a crisis to change. You don't need permission. You don't need to wait until you're ready. You just need to stop lying to yourself about how much time you have. Because one day, without warning, you'll realize the future you were saving for has arrived. And it's smaller than you imagined. There's a hard truth you only understand when you've lived long enough. Money solves problems, but it doesn't answer questions. And the older you get, the more questions you have. I spent most of my life believing that if I just earned enough, everything else would fall into place. Freedom, confidence, peace. That's the promise we're sold. But money doesn't give you freedom. It gives you options. And if you don't know who you are or what you want, options just become another source of anxiety. I know people with far more money than I ever made. They're just as lost, sometimes more. Because when money removes excuses, you're left alone with yourself. And if you've spent your life avoiding yourself, that can be terrifying. Here's something I wish I had understood earlier. Money is a tool, but I treated it like a destination. I spent decades chasing a number, thinking that once I reached it, I'd finally feel secure enough to live. But security isn't something you arrive at. It's something you build internally. And I didn't build it. I outsourced it to my bank account. The tragedy isn't that money can't buy happiness. It's that chasing money can quietly steal the time you needed to discover what actually makes you feel alive. I used to tell myself I was doing all of this for my family, for their future. And that was partly true, but it was also convenient. It allowed me to avoid harder conversations. Conversations like, what kind of example am I setting? What am I teaching them about courage, about choice, about self-respect? I thought I was teaching responsibility, but I was also teaching fear. Children don't learn from what you say. They learn from what you tolerate. They learn from what you sacrifice. And I sacrificed myself slowly, one sensible decision at a time. If you're younger than me and watching this, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need to blow up your life, but you do need to stop living on autopilot. Ask yourself uncomfortable questions. Not someday. Now. What are you doing purely because it's expected of you? What are you afraid to try because you might fail publicly? What are you postponing because it feels irresponsible? Those answers matter because one day those postponed things will turn into regrets. And regret doesn't care how logical your reasons were. It only cares that you didn't act. I also want to say something about age. People love to say, it's never too late. That sounds comforting, but it's also incomplete. It may not be too late to start, but it is too late to get the time back. That distinction matters. I can still change the parts of my life, and I have, but I can't relive my 30s with courage instead of caution. I can't go back and take the risks that felt scary but manageable back then. That opportunity has passed, and that's the part I mourn. Not because my life is bad now, but because it could have been so much bigger, more expressive, more honest. If you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, you're sitting on something incredibly valuable. Leverage. You have time to recover from mistakes, time to rebuild, time to learn, time to pivot. The older you get, the more expensive change becomes, not just financially, emotionally, socially, psychologically. People get used to you being a certain way, and so do you. Breaking that pattern takes more energy than most people are willing to admit. That's why so many people stay stuck. They don't lack intelligence, they lack momentum. Momentum comes from action, and action requires discomfort. There's no way around that. I avoided discomfort for most of my life, and comfort repaid me with mediocrity, not failure, something worse. A quiet, acceptable life that never demanded my best. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't confuse comfort with happiness. Comfort is static. Happiness is active. It comes from engagement, from growth, from doing things that stretch you, even when they scare you, especially when they scare you. I'm not angry at my younger self. I understand him now. He was trying to survive. But survival is not the same as living, and nobody tells you when it's time to switch from one to the other. You have to notice it yourself, and most people don't until it's too late. I'm 68 years old now. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because context matters. When you reach this age, time stops feeling abstract. You don't measure it in years anymore. You measure it in good mornings, in holidays left, in conversations you still want to have. Every year feels heavier, not because it's bad, but because you're more aware that it won't repeat. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I know this. I wasted enough of it already. And that's why I'm saying this now. Not to impress you, not to sound wise, but because I don't want you to make the same mistake I did. I spent my life thinking money would protect me from stress, from regret, from fear. It didn't. It only made my cage more comfortable, and comfortable cages are the hardest to escape. If you're watching this and thinking, but I need to be responsible, I understand. That voice ran my life for decades, but responsibility without self respect turns into self betrayal. You don't need to destroy your stability, you need to stop worshiping it. Ask yourself this: if nothing changes, if you keep living exactly the way you are now, where will you be in 10 years? Not financially, internally. Will you feel proud of how you spent your time? Will you recognize yourself? Will you feel like you chose your life or accepted it? These are uncomfortable questions. That's why most people avoid them. But avoiding them doesn't make them go away. It just postpones the reckoning. I can tell you this with complete honesty. Your regrets won't be about money. They won't be about the risk that didn't work out. They'll be about the chances you never took, the conversations you avoided, the paths you didn't explore, the parts of yourself you kept locked away because they didn't fit the plan. I don't lose sleep over financial decisions. I lose sleep over silence, over the words I didn't say, the moves I didn't make, the life I delayed for a future that never arrived. If I could talk to my younger self, the man in his 30s who thought he was being smart, I would tell him this: stop confusing fear with wisdom. Stop waiting for certainty. Stop asking for permission to live. You don't need to know how everything will work out. You just need to know what you're not willing to keep tolerating. Start small. Say no to what drains you. Say yes to what scares you a little. Pay attention to what makes you feel alive, not just secure. And most importantly, stop telling yourself you'll do it later. Later is a lie. Later is how years disappear. Later is how potential turns into regret. The life you're postponing isn't waiting for you. It's happening right now. And one day, sooner than you think, you'll look back and realize this moment was your chance to choose differently. I'm not bitter. I've made peace with my past. But peace doesn't erase clarity. And clarity is this: playing it safe cost me more than any failed risk ever could. If you're younger than me, you still have leverage. Use it. Be brave while it's still affordable. Don't wait until courage costs more than you're willing to pay. I'm 68. I don't have unlimited time. But you, right now, still do. Don't waste it trying to be comfortable. Use it to be alive. If this resonated with you, don't just nod and move on. Think about what you're going to do differently. Have the conversation, take the step, make the change, and do it now. Because the biggest mistake of my life wasn't money, it was waiting. And I promise you, waiting is far more expensive than you think.